All right, so we're going to continue chapter 6, and so this is going to be part 2 of chapter 6. Now, I told you earlier in chapter 1 that bones are made up of cells. Bones is an organ, and since it's an organ, it's going to be made up of tissues, right? Then we look at the tissues of the bone. We look at the osseous, which is the major bone tissue. We look at adipose tissue, look at connective tissues, cartilage. Those are bone tissues. Uh, then I also told you that nervous tissue is also part of the bone, right? Now, so we are going to start looking at the cells that make up those tissues. All right. Now, predominantly, there are five major cells. Now, there are five major cells here. We talk about the osteogenic cells or osteoprogenitor cells. They are the same. So, osteogenic is the same as osteoprogenitor. We have the osteoblast, the osteocyte, the bone lining cells, and the osteoclast. Now, so if you look at the osteogenic cells or osteoprogenitor cells, they originate from cells that we call the mesenchymal cells. Those are the cells that originate from the mesoderm. All right, we call them mesenchymal cells of the mesoderm. All right, so these mesenchymal cells are the cells that give rise to, so these cells divide, they differentiate, and they give rise to osteogenic cells. So they undergo mitotic divisions because they are stem cells. So these cells undergo mitosis, they then produce osteoprogenitor cells or osteogenic cells. They are the same thing. Now, these cells, osteoprogenitor cells, are then going to, so they are mitotically active stem cells. They are located in the periosteum and the endosteum. And you remember the periosteum simply means the outer layer of the bone, and endosteum is the inward layer, right? Now, when they are stimulated, they are going to differentiate as though they specialize to form osteoblast. Now, osteoblast or bone lining cells. Now, some will remain as osteogenic cells, which will still be stem cells to give rise to other cells. Okay. So, first thing I want you to take note is that osteogenic cells, they are the stem cells of the bone, actually, but they originate from mesenchymal cells. Now, mesenchymal cell is going to differentiate. You can see that here. It's going to differentiate to become osteoblast. And the osteoblast, this B, we call it osteobuild. All right, osteobuild. The reason we call it osteobuild is because what it does is to build. It does anabolic process by building. What does it build? It build what we call the bone matrix. All right, it build the bone matrix. Now, don't forget, osteoblast is produced by progenitor cells, and what they do is to build. They build the bone matrix, and you know the bone matrix is made up of collagen fibers and calcium salt, calcium phosphate, calcium sulfate. Those calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate, those are the components of collagen fiber. So it is the of the bone matrix. It is the osteoblast that build the bone matrix, which consists of the bone matrix consists of collagen fiber and calcium phosphate or calcium carbonate. Now, osteoblasts are also going to undergo mitosis. They are also going to differentiate, and they will give rise to the cell that we call osteocyte. Now, osteoblasts, we call them immature. Before I leave, we call them immature bone cells. All right. So osteoblasts, they are immature bone cells. All right. And the next cell is that these cells is going to differentiate as well and give rise to the cells that are the mature bone cells, which are the osteocytes. So osteocytes are mature bone cells. So these are mature bone cells. You see that? They are mature bone cells. Now, they are mature bone cells and they are located in a shell called lacunae. So it's like you have peanuts inside the shell. All right. They don't undergo mitosis. They don't divide. They are mature already. Now, what they are doing, their job is to maintain the bone matrix. All right. So the bone matrix, you have the bone matrix again. I told you is collagen fiber and calcium phosphate or calcium carbonate. All right. So the job of these cells, the osteocyte, is to maintain that matrix. All right. Now, they respond to mechanical stimuli such as increased force on bone or weightlessness. They also communicate information to osteoblast and osteoclast, which I'll be talking about. All right. Now, the other cells here are the bone lining cells. So these are flat cells on bone surface. They are believed to also help to maintain the matrix, just like the osteocyte does. Now, on the external surface, lining cells are called periosteal cells. When you look at it from the outside, internal cells, so the one on the periosteum are the periosteal cells. The one on the endosteum are the endosteal cells. Those are that. Now, from what I've done now, you will have realized that number one, in quote, mesenchymal cells give rise to osteogenic cells. Osteogenic cells give rise to osteoblast, and osteoblasts give rise to osteocyte. Now, where is osteoclast coming from? These cells are coming from immune cells, which is called monocytes. It's a white blood cell. All right. So the origin of these cells, of this osteoclast, is from the immune cells. So that means it's going to perform immune function because that's its origin, right? Now, you can say his name is osteoclast. The difference between this and blast is that this is C, blast is B. So what does this C mean? It helps to clean the matrix. All right. You can say clean the matrix or clear the matrix. All right. So again, osteoblasts build the matrix, osteoclasts clean the matrix. And I will explain that as we go. Now, they are derived from hematopoietic stem cells that become macrophages. Now, they are giant multinucleate, meaning that they have multiple nucleus or multiple nuclei, and they help with bone reabsorption. So the resorption means reabsorption. So they help to reabsorb bone, and meaning that they help to break down bone. They break down the bone, brain resorption. Now, when active, cells are located in the pressure called resorption base. Cells have this osteoclasts, they have raw food borders that serve to increase surface area for enzyme degradation of bone. They also help to seal off areas from surrounding matrix. I'm going to explain all of that together as we go. I'll be talking about the function of each of those cells. Okay, so again, if you look at all the cells we looked at, these are osteoprogenitor cells. I just returned to this slide to show you a few things. These are osteoprogenitor cells. Again, these cells originate from the mesenchymal cells. All right. These cells, they originate from the mesenchymal cells. Mesenchymal cells give rise to these cells. Okay. They give rise to these cells through mitotic division. These cells also, osteoprogenitor cells, now differentiate to form osteoblast. Then osteoblasts differentiate to form osteocytes. You can see that there. So that's a cycle. Mesenchymal cells give rise to osteoprogenitor. Osteoprogenitor give rise to osteoblast. The job of osteoblast is to build a matrix, and the matrix means collagen fiber, calcium phosphate, or calcium carbonate. Then osteoblast is going to differentiate to form osteocyte. And I told you that osteocytes are mature bone cells and they are located inside the shell, which we call lacunae. Then osteoclast, it has a different origin. Its purpose is to break down the matrix The job of osteocyte is to maintain the matrix. The job of osteoblast is to build the matrix. So osteoclasts break down the matrix. And so if there are infectious pathogen, if there are any foreign thing in the matrix, it's going to break them down because that's its job. It clean the matrix and make it clean and healthy. So it does immune function. And the reason it does immune function is because it originates from white blood cell, monocytes. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Let's go. Now, those are the bones. Now we want to look at compact bone. When you see a compact bone, what does it mean? Now, I've told you that we have compact bone and spongy bone. I told you that compact bone is a hard bone that you see on the shaft of a long bone or on the exterior of every bone. And inside the bone, you are going to see spongy bones. So we want to look at what is a compact bone. Now, compact bone is also called it's also called lamellar bone. All right. We also call it lamellar bone. All right. Now, what do you see in a compact bone? The functional unit of a compact bone is called osteon. And osteon is the same thing as Avesian system. Now, it has a canal, which we call Avesian canal. All right. We call it central canal or Avesian canal. I'm going to talk about that. We have a canaliculi that help with connection, communication. I'll talk about that. Then we have the interstitial and circumficial lamina. Now, number one, the osteon, which is the same thing as Avesian canal system. Osteon, like I told you, is a structural unit of a compact bone. Just the same way that cells are functional unit of living things, osteons are functional unit of a compact bone. Now, what do you see on it? It consists of elongated cylinder that runs parallel to long axis of bone, and that helps uh, to bear weight. I'll talk about each of that. Now, what is a lamella? A lamella is a ring, simply like a ring around the osteon. Now, I'm going to start with this image here. Okay. Now, this here is what we call the osteon. And I'm going to show you a better image as we go. This is a osteon, and this at the middle here is what we call the central canal. So here is the central canal or Avesian canal, which I'm still going to touch base on. Avesian canal, central canal, they are the same thing. I'll talk about that later. Now, you see there is this ring around the central canal. This is another ring. This is another ring. We call the ring lamella. We call it a concentric ring around the central canal, around the central canal. All right. Now, the lamella contain collagen fiber, and it goes in different direction. Now, what is the purpose of it? Is to help the bone to withstand stress and also to prevent twisting. Now, let's go. Good. Now we want to look at the central canal, and it will make more sense to you at this point. Now, the central canal, you know how we talked about when you have a nucleus, you have a cell, that there will be a nucleus inside the cell. The same way you have the Avesian system or osteon, and inside it you have the central canal. So this, just like the nucleus, is a central canal. All right, is a central canal. Central canal, like I told you, is also the same thing as Avesian canal. So sometimes you see it called central canal, sometimes you see it called Avesian canal. Now, what is inside the central canal? The central canal, it's not like nucleus that have DNA inside it. This central canal has blood vessels and nerves. So in this canal, you are going to see nerves, you are going to see vein, you're going to see artery. Okay. Now, we have perforating canals. These are canals that are lined by endosteums, and you see them at right angle to the central canal. I will show you that. Majorly, what they do, the Volksmann canal, what they do is to connect the blood vessels and nerves of the periosteum which I will show you later. Now, the lacunae, I already told you, lacunae is where the osteocyte is located. So it's like peanut inside the shell. All right. Canaliculi is a canal. Now, think about it as canaliculi, canal. It connects the lacuna to the central canal. That's the job. And I'll tell you why when I'm observing, reviewing the image in a bit. Now, osteoblasts that secrete bone matrix maintain contact with each other and osteocyte via projections with gap junctions. Now, let me go ahead and show you this structure and explain how it relates to you. Okay, I'll come here right now. Very good. So this is a perfect image to show you what the central canal, what the osteon looks like properly. Now, if you look at this is like half of the osteon. So the osteon is going to be like this. The osteon is going to be more like this, continue like this, like a full circle. All right. So this is just like half of the osteon. Okay. Not even up to half, right? Now, this is what we call the central canal. So this is a cell rather. Now you see, this is the osteon. So here is an osteon. This is a different view. I'm sorry about that. This is an osteon. This is another osteon. So this is a cross-sectional view of a bone. This is an osteon, and this again is another osteon. All right, this is another osteon. All these that I'm drawing around, they are osteon. I was meaning to say that this is a bone, right? But all these, my red circles, they are osteon. Now, you will notice that at the middle of the osteon, this is a central canal. Again, osteon is the same thing as Avesian system. Central canal is the same thing as Avesian cycle or Avesian canal. Now, inside the Avesian canal, we have, you see, red and blue. So we have blood vessels there, artery, vein, and nerves. We have artery, veins, and nerves there. Now, look at something with me very carefully. Now, you see there is a ring, as this is the central canal here, right? This is the central canal. Now, you see there's this circle again that forms around the central canal. This circle is what we call the lamella. You see another one here. This is another circle. That is a lamella. The same thing here. If you come here, this is a circle around the central canal again. That is a lamella. This is another circle. Each of those rings, we call them lamella. Now, if you come to this image here, again, this is the central canal. These are the lamella. It's a set of rings. You see that? Those are lamella. They are rings around the central canal. Now, there is something else that is very important, and that is the canaliculi. Now, if you look at this, particularly from here, you see this is the central canal where we have the blood vessels, we have the nerves, and we have. Now, think about it. What is the function of blood vessels? Is to circulate nutrients, circulate oxygen, circulate nutrients, right? Now, how is it? And all of these are the blood, the cells, the bone cell, lacunae. These are the lacunae, all right? These are the lacunae, the shell that hosts the bone cells. So the bone cell is, here's the bone cell inside the lacunae, all right? Now, how will these bone cells get nutrients? Now, for them to get nutrients, there are connections like fiber. You see, this guy now, this is a fiber. Again, this is another fiber. You see, these are fibers. All of these here, they are fibers. Okay, these are fibers. Okay, these are fibers. They look like fiber. That's the best way I can tell you. You see all those lines here? We call them canaliculi. What do? They all make sure that there's a connection between the lacunae and the central canal so that nutrient can flow into that point. All right. So the major thing that the canaliculi does is to ensure that there's connection to allow movements of nutrients into from the central canal to the to the trabecular, to the lacuna that host the the bone cells. Now, you see, these are the perforating canal. You see what it does? They connect each osteon, each avasian canal or central canal to each other. You see that? That is a connection. It connects each avasian canal to each other. You see, there's another perforating canal here. All right, let's go. So that's what the osteon looks like. That's the orientation of the osteon and how they appear. Now, when you look at spongy bones, now spongy bone, they appear poorly organized, but they are actually organized along the lines. Now, the reason we say they appear unorganized is the way the trabecula appears. The trabecula just appear like a network, is a network, like a network that of fibers. So you see, they are like cables, just like network cables. All right. Now, the major thing they do is that they also provide strength to bone. That's what you see in spongy bone. You see trabecula there. Now, the way I want you to picture it is to just think about it that the same way, very close, not 100%, but the same way you have central canal in compact bone, that's about the same way the trabecula is in spongy bones. All right. The trabecula is about the same way that you have central canal. All right. Now, no osteons are present. Here, there's no osteon because osteon is only in compact bone. But you see, trabecula do contain irregularly arranged lamella. So the lamina is there. The lacunae is also there because osteocytes are there. And you see, they are connected by canaliculi, which connect the trabecula to the uh to the lacunae. All right. So just exactly like what we have in compartment, we still have it here as well. Capillaries in the endosteum supply nutrient. That's still like the same orientation. The only difference is trabecula is what we have here, but we have osteon. We have central canal in compact bone. Okay, so chemical composition of bones. Bones is made up of organic and inorganic compounds, uh, organic components. And like I told you earlier, I told you that the organic component is made up of the osteogenic cells, the osteoblast, the osteocyte, the bone lining cells, the osteoclast, and the osteoid. And I told you the osteoid is the bone matrix, all right? The osteoid itself makes up about 1/3 of the organic bone matrix, which is secreted by osteoclast. And I told you that consists of collagen fiber. Okay, so that's made up of collagen fiber. And what fiber does is to create that resilience, the strength that you see, and flexibility in bone. So the resiliency of bone is due to the sacrificial bond on in between the collagen fiber molecules. You see that? That's how bone has resilience. Let's go now. The inorganic component is a hydroxyapatite, which are mineral salts. That's a calcium phosphate, where the calcium phosphate fall into. This makes up 65% of the bone mass. It consists mainly of tiny calcium phosphate crystals in and around collagen fiber. You see that? So the the matrix, it's made up of inorganic and organic component. The organic component is the collagen fiber predominantly, and the inorganic component is the hydroxyapatite, which is made up of calcium phosphate and the calcium carbonate. And again, what's the major job of the calcium is to uh, that's what ascertain the hardness, the strength of bone. Collagen deals with the resilience, the flexibility. Um, Calcium deals with the hardening. All right. Now let's look at bone ossification or bone formation. Now, ossification simply means formation. Ossification means formation. Bone formation is the same thing as ossification, is the same thing as osteogenesis. Osteo genesis, beginning of bone. All right. Now, formation of bone skeleton begins in month two of development. So you know that the time when when the child is are referred to as embryo is. So bone formation begins in about the embryonic stage, right? About 2 months, and then continues to the fetal stage, which is about 3 months of development. Now, uh, then the bone continues to grow up till adulthood. So bone formation does not s- stop after the baby is born. The bone continues to develop up to adulthood. Then modeling and remodeling repairs continue through the lifetime. And that is where we'll be talking about the function of those bone cells that we studied earlier. Now, up to about week 8, what we see first in every in the fetus is fibrous membrane and hyaline cartilage forms the fetal skeleton. Now, then after that, bone tissue start to replace that fibrous membrane and hyaline cartilage in the fetal skeleton. Now, there are two types of bone formation. There is the endochondral ossification, and there is intramembranous ossification. Endochondria, when you see endo means inside, chondro means cartilage, and ossification means bone formation. So this simply means bone formation that require cartilage. So what is going to happen here is that bone will be replacing the hyaline cartilage that initiated the process, and the bones are called cartilage endochondral bones. Now, this is what form most of the skeleton in our body. Then the intermembranous ossification, this does not involve cartilage. Cartilage is not involved here. It's think about it that it is intramembranous, so it's inside membrane, so it only involves membrane. And I'm going to be talking about that to details as we go. So the bone is going to develop from fibrous membrane. All right. Now I've told you that up to 8 weeks, what you have that form the fetal skeleton is fibrous membrane. So those fibrous membrane is going to form what we call is going to initiate intermembranous ossification, and then the hyaline cartilage is going to initiate endochondral ossification. So think about it that way. Before the bone formation process proper starts, fibrous membrane and hyaline cartilage is what forms the embryo skeleton. Now, after that process, as the bone initiates, the bone ossification gets initiated, the fibrous membrane is going to form some bones. That process, we call it intramembranous ossification. And then the hyaline cartilage is going to form some other bones. We call that endochondral ossification. Okay, so we're going to look at endochondral ossification first. Then we go to discuss intramembranous ossification. Now, endochondral ossification, I told you it involves cartilage changing to bone cells. That is simply what it means. It forms essentially all bones inferior to the skull, to the base of the skull, except the clavicle. Most of the bones are formed through endochondral ossification, and this usually begins late in the second week, in the second month of development. Um, so you see it more after the 8 weeks. Now, the foundation for this is that hyaline cartilage model will be used to form as precursor to form the bones. And so what's going to happen is that since hyaline cartilage has been formed first, cartilage was existing before the bone formation is going to happen. So that means we're going to have to break down the cartilage. We're going to break down this cartilage and then begin bone formation proper. Now, it's simply that the cartilage are replaced by bone. So if there's going to be bone formation, there has to be a point where the bone formation is going to begin. So we call that point primary ossification center. All right. And usually this is at the middle of the shaft. So you have the shaft, and it's usually the ossification center. Primary one is usually at the beginning of the shaft. Now, at this point, what is going to happen is there will be blood vessels that will penetrate the perichondrium. You remember perichondrium is the outer layer of the cartilage. You remember that? Now, and it will convert it to periosteum. Periosteum is what covers, chondrium is cartilage, osteon is bone. So the periochondria, blood vessels will penetrate the perichondrium so that it will start to convert the perichondrium to be covering of the bone. All right. Then the next thing is that mesenchymal cells are now going to specialize into osteoblast. All right. So from the mesenchymal cells, so for cartilage to be formed as well, mesenchymal cells is also the precursor. So mesenchymal cell is the one that forms cartilage as well. So now, instead of the mesenchymal cells to be converted to chondroblast, which are the bone of the cells of the cartilage, it will be converted to uh, osteoblast. Now, let's look at the steps involved in bone formation. We'll look at the stages and then we go ahead and look at now bone formation, endochondral bone formation. Now, if you look at this, the first thing that forms is that there is an existing cartilage. Now, like I said, the cartilage are formed from mesenchymal cells as well. So they have the same origin as the bone cells. Both they are produced, the cells of the cartilage are chondrocytes and chondroblast, immature cells, and the mature cells are chondrocytes. Now, the first thing that happened, again, there is an existing cartilage, and that's why we call it endochondral ossification. The first thing that is going to happen there is that the primary ossification center is going to form, which is what you see there. So the primary ossification center form first. Once the primary ossification center, you see that's the primary ossification center there. So it forms along at the center of the shaft. Okay, you remember the shaft means diaphysis. Okay, so you see, and so bone collar bones. So that's the collar bones forms there. Uh, Around the diaphysis of the hyaline cartilage model. So this is the cartilage model. Now the next thing that is going to happen is that the cartilage the cartilage there will start to become calcified. Calcified means calcification, addition of calcium, addition of calcium. So that's what happened as the second stage there. Now, the next thing that happens, and the whole of this process, I told you it starts right after week 8, right? So that's about week 9 up or thereabouts. Now, the next thing you see the spongy bones begins to form. Then I told you about that the periosteum board will be formed as well. How the blood vessels impart the periosteum, uh, the perichondria, right? Then change it to periosteum. We talked about that earlier. Now, the periosteum board will invade the internal cavities and spongy bone will form. So the first thing that form in bone formation is spongy bones. So you see spongy bone is forming here. Blood vessel is already invaded, has already invaded the area. Then spongy bone forms. Now the next thing is that the diaphysis will start to elongate. So you see it's limited in this area before, starts as primary ossification center. Now it elongates and it's now longer. Now, as it elongates, medullary cavity is going to form in between it, which is going to hold the bone marrow. All right. Now, as medullary cavity forms, then the secondary ossification center is going to form at the epiphysis area. So, secondary ossification center forms at the epiphysis. And that is very important because that is what initiates the lengthening of the bone. All right. Now, then at the epiphysis, again, spongy bone is going to form just the same way it forms here. You know, primary education center was initiated, spongy bone forms, then it elongates. The same thing here. Spongy bone is going to form here as the secondary after the secondary ossification center forms.